This conference will now be recorded.
All right, folks. So we spent some time looking at the different aspects of the special senses as far as the eye and the ear anatomy, as well as a review of the brain anatomy and such, and looking at the sagittal head in particular. So let's now begin with, we'll introduce this chapter of information regarding the autonomic nervous system in particular. So we're going to be focusing on the autonomic nervous system. And when you think autonomic, think automatic. We have no control over this as far as, things are going to happen and be controlled via our nervous system. And once you enter into a state of say of panic, of fear, your body will then kick in with releasing chemicals that will stimulate the sympathetic reaction that we'll be talking about a little bit later on today. So what I would recommend is to please review this, take some notes from it, and we will from there, and we'll finish it up on Thursday of this week. So when we think somatic, so first off, I said this is about the autonomic nervous system, and so we would say it's the automatic system, not a correct definition, but just something for you to think about as far as that it is automatic. But somatic, when we're thinking somatic, and let's start with slide presentation, we're thinking of voluntary control, okay? So skeletal muscle is the effector. We're sending information, we've received some type of sensory input, and the motor output will be going to the skeletal muscles, and we have conscious control over this. So this is, you're thinking the precentral gyrus and areas anterior to it in the frontal lobe that have conscious control over what's taking place in our extremities in our skeletal muscle. Okay, you'll see here that, and it's something important to know is like when we're comparing the different systems, know that somatic, there's one synapse. Okay, cell bodies of the motor neurons are located in central nervous system. Their axons extend to the skeletal muscle. So recall that the dendrites are taking information, right, to the neuron cell body, right, the soma. Let's escape, and that is corrected there. That's good. So the soma is the cell body, right? Dendrites are receiving, so there's action potentials and there's graded potentials. Graded potentials are traveling on the dendrites to the soma, to the neuron cell body. Axons are carrying action potential, and we studied this in last semester as far as AMP1 when we looked at the neuromuscular junction, right? That's a synapse there. It's a chemical synapse. Remember that it's not the axon of the motor neuron touching the skeletal muscle. That doesn't take place. There's a space. There's a space between where that acetylcholine, that neurotransmitter, can pass into the synaptic cleft, and then that will have in the synaptic cleft, that space, the acetylcholine will travel, and then there will be on the skeletal muscle side specific receptors for acetylcholine in order to then make change at the neuromuscular junction there. Okay, so one synapse, chemical synapse, neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Autonomic nervous system. So this is a series of two neurons. Okay, and depending upon whether we're in the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, we're going to have then longer or shorter pre and post ganglionic neurons. Okay, so you'll see that in just a moment here. So smooth cardiac muscle and or gland, this is the effector of the autonomic nervous system, unconscious control, involuntary, two synapses. Okay, and so you'll see here as far as remember at the neuromuscular junction. Okay, so let's, all right. Well, here's the thing. Here's the axon terminal of the axon, of the motor neuron axon, right? And then here we have that synaptic cleft, The purple dots are the acetylcholine. Here we have the motor end plate of the skeletal muscle. And so what's taking place then, folks, is that this would be preganglionic, the axon terminal itself, preganglionic. The motor end plate would be postganglionic, okay? That's the terms that we would use. Preganglionic, postganglionic, right, of this chemical synapse. Okay? So when we're looking at, when we think of these terms, pre and post, that's kind of some things that you need to keep in mind, okay, regarding this. So the first neuron, preganglionic. The second neuron, so there are two neurons. It's not just one neuron, two neurons, postganglionic. Now, I'm going to show you, before we move on, let's show you an image here. Yeah. Actually, you know what? Okay. So the sympathetic pain ganglia. Okay. Now, let's see. I'm trying to find this. This is going to work. Okay. All right. So what you're seeing here is that for the sympathetic chain ganglia, these, and it's bilateral, it's on both sides. You'll see that this chain ganglia are areas where there's going to be the first synapse. Remember, we said that there's two synapses. Let's take a look here. So two neurons, two synapses. Okay. So here we have the first synapse, and then the second synapse will take place in the areas where the organs that we're reaching out to. Okay. So the first synapse is going to be taking place very close to the spine. This chain ganglia approximates very close to, so this would represent the spinal cord. So this sympathetic chain ganglia are bilateral on both sides of the spinal cord, of the spine. And so this is where the first synapse takes place. And then we have the second synapse will take place in the actual area where we have the organs that'll be, some type of change will take place. So know that there's a short preganglionic and a long postganglionic. Short preganglionic, long postganglionic fibers. Okay? What happens then is that really what's taking place is that and that's the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight type of reaction. Hey, I see a bear and I'm either going to run or I'm going to have to like wrestle it or do something stupid, right? But all depending, I mean, it's not a good thing when you see a bear. Other than that, you should make yourself bigger and make noise and hope to God that it doesn't try and fight you or chase you. But imagine if you see this, right? And it's up, you start initiating the sequence of events that will really like get you jacked up that you're going to do something. Okay. We all have experienced this adrenaline rush, right? AKA epinephrine. This chemical released from the adrenal glands, it's going to give you like superpower, so to speak, you know, and get you either you're going to be running real fast or fighting like crazy for survival. Okay. Sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, which would be the craniosacral type. We'll see this in a moment come up. But here we're going to have longer pre and short postganglionic neurons. Now I say that to you and you're like, what? I'm not understanding. It's okay. You know, it takes a little bit to kind of get this information down. There's not a lot of slides in this presentation, but it's chock full of a lot of information. Okay. So let's go here. So two synapses, right? And so what you're seeing here, folks, here's the somatic. This is what we're used to. This is what we learned in last semester, right? And understand that, you know, really what's going on is that we have motor output going to this area. So there's sensory input. It's coming here through the dorsal root and the dorsal chain ganglia, the dorsal ganglia right here, dorsal root. That's information coming to the central nervous system. This is information going away from, right? This is the motor output that we've talked about for the neuromuscular junction, motor output from the ventral region of the spinal cord. Now, here we have, as far as the autonomic pathway, okay? So we have here central neuron synapses with the ganglionic neuron. So this would represent an issue where we would have this sympathetic chain ganglia close to the cord. So we have a short presynaptic axon and presynaptic ganglia to a postsynaptic, which is longer. So short pre, long post. You have to kind of think about it this way, because what's going to happen is that, I'll come back to that image. Okay, this image right here is showing you sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic, you see how there's this short preganglionic axon? How about this longer postganglionic axon of the neuron? Parasympathetic, where the majority of your restorative functions rest and digest. There's another term that's used called SLUDD, salivation, lacrimation, urination, defecation, and digestion, defecation. Okay, that's an acronym for, again, parasympathetic. The restorative functions of your body, parasympathetic. A long preganglionic, a short postganglionic axon. Okay, so back here. So this right here is really important for you to just commit to memory and to know, right, that when you're thinking of the central nervous system, you think of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? The peripheral nervous system, it's the cranial nerves, spinal nerves, right? So 12 pairs of cranial nerves, right? The spinal nerves, communications between all the different the nerves and such throughout the body, right? They're covering the body, the sensory neurons and nerves. Peripheral nervous system. We have somatic and visceral sensory nerve fibers, right? They're sending information to peripheral nervous system, and then eventually will reach the central nervous system. The motor output, efferent, so remember afferent, that motor efferent, that motor output will then go to the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. Somatic is voluntary control, autonomic is involuntary control, and we would break down the autonomic nervous system to sympathetic, parasympathetic, right? So sympathetic, fight or flight, really it's preparing the body for action. Preparing the body for action, sympathetic division, sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic division, aka the parasympathetic nervous system, conserves energy and involved in the restorative type functions of the body. Again, that, if I put it in, I think that I did. Yes, I did. Okay, good. Yeah, so you'll see here, I'm going to do a review of this next class. So I'm going to pretty much just go over a little bit of information and then stop for today. Then I'll finish it up on Thursday. So you'll see here, sympathetic division, right? Prepares the body for action, fight or flight, okay? This is really, your body should not be under sympathetic control for long periods of time. It's not healthy, it's not good. When you're stressed out, that's what's going on. This is not healthy for your body long term, okay? It's called the thoracolumbar also division. Sympathetic division, the thoracolumbar division. You'll see here, as far as mentioned to you about that chain ganglia, okay? So again, it has that short pre, long post, as far as those neurons that are present, the axons of the neurons. Yeah, I'm just going to cover this. Then I want to cover slide. This is the one. I want to look at 17. Okay, so because I want to introduce this to you, talk about it for a moment, then let you start to think about it and review it in your head and go over it. And then this way, when we meet again on Thursday, you will have gone through all of this information, reviewed it, and put a little bit more time thinking about it and what it means. So I said to you that the sympathetic division was the thoracolumbar. The parasympathetic would be the cranial sacral. Yes, so they can actually, yes, can they initiate and contribute to really their sympathetic response? Absolutely. What happens when you go for a job interview? You get dry mouth, you get a little sweaty, you get very nervous. And this is just something that's not, it's not like something is going to attack you, right? But it's still a mental issue, right? It's still this, it's all in your head, so to speak, but it really can jack you up and stimulate that sympathetic nervous system, absolutely, and create that sympathetic response, which again, not healthy. The parasympathetic, known as the craniosacral region, right? Rest and digest, the SLUD, the salivation, lacrimation, urination, digestion, defecation. When you're thinking of parasympathetic influence, throughout most of the day, you are under parasympathetic influence. Okay, very important. Yeah, good. I want to end with this for today. Now, there's more information regarding sympathetic and parasympathetic effects on what takes place with the human body. What I would do is I would memorize what takes place with sympathetic response so that if you have an idea what's going on with sympathetic, you can have an understanding what takes place parasympathetic wise. Okay? So it's really helpful to memorize one and not both. Okay, so if you memorize that one is the sympathetic and what's taking place under sympathetic influence and effects, then you can have an idea regarding parasympathetic would be pretty much opposite, okay? Or no innervation whatsoever as far as for the sweat glands, arteries to skeletal muscle and the veins, okay? That. So important to look at this. Please review this over and over. These are the kind of questions that are clinical questions that can be asked of you on different types of board exams, as well as exams that we prepare for you here in anatomy and physiology. But board exams like to ask you questions that, so what happens when, what is the effect of the sympathetic effect upon, and they'll say it in certain ways with under stressful conditions, what's going to happen with the pupil, is it going to dilate or constrict? And really what's going on is that, so I'll focus on one here, the dilation that takes place. So this is important because we want, if we're under stress and we need to fight, we need to run, wouldn't it make sense to have as much light entering in as possible to make sure that we have as best visual acuity and ability to see, even if it's in the dark, as possible, if we were to have a dilation of the pupil, if we're under some type of attack under sympathetic influence. So yeah, so it really does make sense. So please review this, go over this. And so we will finish up this chapter on Thursday. And I will, like I said, I'm going to do a review, talk to you about it, go over some images and such. And I really want to make sure that you just get a good understanding of these slides under the autonomic nervous system.